Sergeant Daniel Hayes had been in the military for 8 years, and he had never once broken formation during a ceremony. Not once. His record was spotless, his uniform always pressed to perfection. His boots shined so bright they could blind someone from 50 feet away. Every other soldier in his unit knew that if you wanted to see military discipline in action, you watched Daniel Hayes. The morning of May 15th started like any other ceremonial day. The entire base was preparing for the visit of Senator Margaret Thompson, the head of the Armed Services Committee. She was coming to review the troops and announce a new funding package for military families. The press would be there, cameras rolling. Every news station in the country would be watching. Daniel stood in formation with his unit, 82nd Infantry Division, in the main parade ground. 300 soldiers stood in perfect rows, their rifles at their sides, eyes straight ahead. The morning sun beat down on their faces, but not one soldier moved. They had been standing there for 45 minutes, waiting for the senator to arrive. Captain Rodriguez walked up and down the lines, checking every soldier's appearance. When he reached Daniel, he gave a small nod of approval. Daniel's uniform was perfect, as always. His chest was decorated with ribbons from his deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. His boots reflected the morning light like mirrors. Soldiers. "The senator's convoy will arrive in 10 minutes, Captain Rodriguez announced. "Remember, you represent not just this base, but the entire United States military today. Every camera will be on you. Every reporter will be watching. Make your country proud." Daniel felt a familiar surge of pride in his chest. He loved these moments when all the training and discipline came together for something important. He had grown up in a small town in Ohio where his father worked at a factory and his mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. Joining the military had given him purpose, respect, and a chance to serve something bigger than himself. As the minutes ticked by, Daniel noticed movement in the crowd of families and reporters gathered behind the barriers. The senator would first inspect the troops, then give a speech about supporting military families. After that, there would be a medal ceremony for soldiers who had shown exceptional bravery in recent deployments, but something caught Daniel's eye in the crowd. A small figure was moving restlessly near the barrier, about 50 yards to his right. It was a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with curly brown hair and a bright yellow dress. She was tugging on her mother's hand. Pointing at something behind the formation, Daniel tried to ignore the distraction and focus straight ahead, as he had been trained to do. But the little girl kept moving, and something about her behavior made him uneasy. She seemed scared, not excited like the other children in the crowd. The sound of helicopters filled the air as the senator's security detail arrived. 3 black helicopters circled the base before landing on the far side of the parade ground. The ceremony was about to begin, and every soldier needed to be at perfect attention. Daniel forced himself to look straight ahead, but his peripheral vision caught more movement from the little girl. She had broken away from her mother and was running toward the formation. Her mother was calling after her, but the woman was trapped behind the barrier by the crowd of reporters and other families. "Mommy, the man, the bad man," the little girl was shouting, but her small voice was lost in the noise of the helicopters and the crowd. Daniel's training told him to stay in formation. Breaking formation during a ceremony was a serious offense that could result in disciplinary action, loss of rank, or even discharge. He had worked too hard and too long to throw away his career for anything, but something was wrong. The little girl was running directly toward the formation, and she was clearly terrified of something behind them. Daniel's combat instincts, honed through 2 deployments in hostile territory, were screaming at him that this wasn't normal behavior for a child at a military ceremony. Captain Rodriguez was walking toward the front of the formation to greet the senator's advance team. The press was setting up their cameras for the perfect shot of the senator inspecting the troops. Everything was falling into place for what should have been a routine, successful ceremony. The little girl was getting closer, tears streaming down her face. "Help! Help! The bad man has a gun!" she cried, but her voice was still too small and the noise too loud for anyone in authority. Every fiber of his military training told him to maintain position, but every instinct as a human being told him something was desperately wrong. He had learned to trust his instincts during combat, and those same instincts were telling him that this little girl might be the key to preventing something terrible. The senator's convoy was now visible. 3 black SUVs driving slowly toward the parade ground. The press was adjusting their cameras for the perfect angle. Captain Rodriguez was walking back toward the formation. Ready to call the troops to attention for the formal inspection, Daniel made a split-second decision that would change everything. After 8 years of perfect military discipline, after never once stepping out of line, he abandoned his position in formation. He broke from the ranks and ran toward the terrified little girl, not knowing that this single moment of apparent insubordination would save lives and prevent what could have been the most devastating attack on American soil in decades. The moment Daniel broke from formation, chaos erupted around him. Captain Rodriguez spun around, his face red with anger and embarrassment. 300 soldiers remained perfectly still, but Daniel could feel their eyes following him as he ran toward the little girl. "Hayes, get back in formation immediately," Captain Rodriguez shouted, his voice carrying across the parade ground. The press cameras swiveled toward the commotion, capturing footage of a soldier apparently going rogue during a high-profile ceremony. Daniel reached the little girl just as she stumbled and fell to her knees, sobbing. He knelt down beside her, his military training kicking in as he scanned the area for threats while trying to calm the child. "Hey there, sweetheart," Daniel said gently, using the same voice he used when talking to his nephew back home. "What's wrong? What bad man are you talking about?" The little girl looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. "The man with the camera." She pointed frantically toward a cluster of news vans parked behind the formation. "He showed me pictures of dead soldiers and said he was going to make more dead soldiers today." Daniel's blood ran cold. He looked in the direction the girl was pointing and saw a man in press credentials standing next to a news van, but something was wrong with the picture. The man was sweating heavily despite the cool morning air, and he kept checking his watch and looking nervously toward the senator's approaching convoy. "Where's your mommy?" Daniel asked the girl, still keeping one eye on the suspicious man. "She's over there." The girl pointed to a woman frantically trying to push through the crowd of reporters and families. "The bad man grabbed me when I was going to get a balloon, but I ran away. I said terrible things about soldiers and showed me scary pictures on his phone." Daniel's combat instincts were now screaming danger. A man with press credentials approaching children, talking about dead soldiers, acting nervous during a high-security event. Every piece of the puzzle pointed to a serious threat. Captain Rodriguez was marching toward them, his face a mask of fury. Behind him, Daniel could see military police starting to move in their direction. To everyone watching, it looked like Sergeant Hayes had lost his mind and abandoned his duty during the most important ceremony of the year. "Hayes, you are in direct violation of orders." Captain Rodriguez barked as he approached. "You will return to formation immediately, or you will be placed under arrest." "Sir, I need to report a possible security threat," Daniel said quickly, still kneeling beside the little girl. This child was approached by a man with press credentials, who showed her disturbing images and made threats about soldiers. "That's the most ridiculous excuse I've ever heard," Captain Rodriguez snapped. "You abandoned formation during a national ceremony because a child was having a tantrum? Get back in line now." But Daniel wasn't backing down. 8 years of perfect military discipline had taught him when to follow orders and when to question them. Something about this situation felt like the moments in Iraq, when his unit had learned to trust their instincts about potential threats. "Sir, with respect, I believe we have a serious security breach," Daniel insisted. "That man by the news vans is not behaving like legitimate press." The senator's convoy was now only 200 yards away, moving slowly toward the parade ground for the formal ceremony. Secret Service agents were walking alongside the vehicles, their eyes scanning the crowd and the formation of soldiers. The little girl tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "There he is," whispered, pointing toward the news vans. "That's the bad man." Daniel looked where she was pointing, and his heart stopped. Suspicious man was no longer by the news van. Instead, he was moving through the crowd of reporters, carrying what looked like a professional camera, but holding it in a way that seemed unnatural and awkward. "Captain Rodriguez, sir, I need you to look at that man with the camera moving toward the senator's route," Daniel said urgently. "Something is wrong with his behavior and his equipment." Captain Rodriguez was about to respond angrily when he noticed the little girl's mother had finally reached them. The woman was crying and grabbed her daughter into her arms. "Thank God. You're safe," the mother sobbed. "I'm so sorry, officer," she said to Captain Rodriguez. "A man with a press badge approached my daughter while I was distracted. He showed her disturbing images on his phone and said some very frightening things about the ceremony. When I tried to call security, he disappeared into the crowd." Captain Rodriguez's expression began to change from anger to concern. The mother's story matched exactly what Daniel had reported, and the timing was too coincidental to ignore. "Ma'am, can you describe this man?" Captain Rodriguez asked quickly. "Mid-30s, dark hair, wearing a blue press vest. He had a large black bag and kept talking about how soldiers deserve to pay for their crimes overseas. He seemed very agitated and kept checking his phone." Daniel pointed toward the crowd of reporters. "There's a man matching that description, moving toward the senator's arrival point with suspicious equipment." For the first time since the ceremony began, Captain Rodriguez looked genuinely worried. The senator's convoy was now less than 100 yards away, and if there was a real threat, they had only seconds to act. "Hayes, if you're wrong about this, your military career is over," Captain Rodriguez said grimly. "If you're right, ... He paused and reached for his radio. "Security command. This is Captain Rodriguez. We have a possible threat in the press area, requesting immediate verification of all press credentials near the senator's arrival point." The response crackled back immediately. Captain Rodriguez: "We show an unauthorized individual with fake press credentials who breached the perimeter 10 minutes ago. Subject is considered armed and dangerous." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. His decision to break formation hadn't been insubordination after all. It had been the first step in uncovering what could have been a catastrophic attack on one of the most important military ceremonies of the year. The parade ground erupted into controlled chaos as Captain Rodriguez's radio crackled with urgent communications from Security Command. Within seconds, plainclothes Secret Service agents materialized from the crowd, moving with swift precision toward the press area where Daniel had spotted the suspicious man. "All units, we have a code red situation," came the voice over Captain Rodriguez's radio. "Subject is armed with an improvised explosive device disguised as camera equipment. Not approach. Repeat, do not approach." Daniel felt his stomach drop. The little girl in the yellow dress had potentially saved hundreds of lives by running to him instead of staying quiet about the scary man who had approached her. Her innocent terror had been the key to unraveling what was now clearly a planned attack. The senator's convoy came to an immediate halt 50 yards from the formation. Secret Service agents surrounded the vehicles while others moved to evacuate the crowd of families and reporters. The precision was remarkable. Within 2 minutes, the area around the suspicious individual was being quietly cleared without causing widespread panic. Captain Rodriguez grabbed Daniel's arm. "Hayes, I need you to stay with this family and get a full statement from the child about everything the suspect said to her. This information could be crucial for the investigation." Daniel knelt down beside the little girl, who was still clinging to her mother's leg. Despite the chaos around them, he kept his voice calm and gentle. "Sweetheart, can you tell me exactly what the bad man said to you? You're very brave, and you've helped keep everyone safe." The little girl wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "He said soldiers hurt people in other countries and that they needed to be punished. He showed me pictures on his phone of soldiers who got hurt, and he said he was going to make sure more soldiers got hurt today," her mother added. "He specifically mentioned the senator by name, said she was responsible for sending soldiers to hurt innocent people, and that today she would see what it felt like to lose people she cared about." Daniel's military training had taught him to recognize the language and tactics of terrorist organizations. The suspect's words indicated this wasn't a random act of violence, but a planned attack designed to target both military personnel and a high-ranking government official. Across the parade ground, Daniel could see the tactical team moving into position. The suspect appeared to realize that his cover had been blown and was now backing away from the crowd. his fake camera equipment held in front of him like a shield. "This is fascinating," whispered a reporter who had managed to stay close enough to observe the situation. A single soldier breaking formation may have just prevented a major terrorist attack on American soil. The irony wasn't lost on Daniel. For 8 years, he had been the model soldier, following every order without question. The one time he chose to trust his instincts over his orders, it turned out to be the most important decision of his military career. Captain Rodriguez returned to their position, his radio buzzing with constant updates. The suspect has been identified as Marcus Webb, former military contractor who was dishonorably discharged 3 years ago for threatening superior officers. He's been on a watch list for anti-government activities. The tactical team was now in position, surrounding Webb from multiple angles. Daniel could see the man's face clearly now, wild eyes, sweat pouring down his cheeks, and the desperate look of someone who knew his plan had failed. "He's got enough explosive material to level half the parade ground," Captain Rodriguez continued. "The bomb squad estimates it would have killed or injured at least 200 people if detonated." Near the formation, in the senator's position, the little girl looked up at Daniel with big, serious eyes. "Mr. Soldier, did I help catch the bad man?" "You absolutely did," Daniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Wow. You're the bravest little girl I've ever met. Because you were smart. Enough to run for help. You saved a lot of people today." The standoff with Webb lasted another 20 minutes. Negotiators tried to talk him down while bomb disposal experts analyzed the device from a safe distance. The suspect kept shouting about military injustices and government corruption, whilst his voice carrying across the now empty parade ground. Finally, a sniper from the tactical team made a clean shot that disabled Webb without detonating the explosive device. The bomb squad moved in immediately to secure the weapon, while paramedics attended to the wounded suspect. As the immediate danger passed, Daniel realized that hundreds of people were now looking at him: fellow soldiers, officers, reporters, and security personnel. The cameras that had come to film a routine ceremony had instead captured a dramatic terrorist plot being foiled by an unlikely hero, Colonel Matthews. The base commander approached their position with several high-ranking officials. "Sergeant Hayes," he said formally, "I understand that you were the first to identify and respond to this threat." Daniel stood at attention. "Sir, I was just doing what seemed right at the time. This little girl deserves the real credit for bringing the threat to light." Senator Thompson, who had been safely evacuated during the crisis, walked over to join the group. Despite the morning's events, she looked composed and determined. "Sergeant Hayes, I understand that you risked your military career to investigate what others might have dismissed as a child's imagination. Ma'am, in combat, we learn to pay attention to details that seem out of place," Daniel replied. This little girl was clearly terrified of something specific, and it seemed important to find out what. The senator knelt down to speak to the little girl directly. "Young lady, you showed incredible bravery today. You helped prevent something very bad from happening to a lot of people." As the crowds were slowly allowed to return and the area was secured, Daniel realized that his decision to abandon formation for mere seconds had indeed prevented what could have been a national scandal, not just the loss of life, but the devastating blow to military morale and public confidence that such an attack would have caused. The ceremony would go on, but everything had changed. What was supposed to be a routine military event had become a story of heroism, instinct, and the power of listening to those who might otherwise be ignored. 3 hours after the crisis ended, Daniel sat in Colonel Matthews' office facing an investigation board that would determine his fate. The room was filled with military officials, FBI agents, and Secret Service investigators who had been called in to review the morning's events. Daniel had expected to face disciplinary action for breaking formation. But the tone of the questioning was unlike anything he had experienced in his 8 years of service. Instead of accusations, he was being treated like a key witness in a national security investigation. "Sergeant Hayes," began Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI. "Walk us through your decision-making process from the moment you first noticed the child in distress." Daniel straightened in his chair. Ma'am, during my deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, we were trained to recognize when civilian behavior indicated potential threats. The child's specific fear of a man with camera equipment, combined with her detailed description of threats against soldiers, matched patterns we learned to watch for in hostile territory. Colonel Matthews leaned forward. Hayes, you've been a model soldier for 8 years. What made you willing to risk your career on the word of a 4-year-old child? Sir, in combat zones, children are often the first to notice when something isn't right in their environment. They haven't learned to ignore their instincts the way adults sometimes do. When this little girl ran toward a formation of armed soldiers instead of away from them, that told me she was more afraid of something else. The investigation revealed that Marcus Webb had been planning his attack for 6 months. He had obtained legitimate press credentials through a complicated identity theft scheme and had spent weeks studying the base layout and ceremony protocols. His plan had been to get as close as possible to both the senator and the military formation before detonating his device. The suspect's psychological profile indicates he was specifically motivated by a desire to damage military morale and public confidence in government officials. Agent Collins continued. His target selection was designed to maximize both casualties and political impact. Daniel learned that Webb had approached several children that morning, trying to use them as unwitting shields to get closer to his target. Most of the children had been too intimidated to speak up, but the little girl in the yellow dress had been brave enough to run for help when she realized something was wrong. Sergeant Hayes, said General Patricia Williams, who had flown in from Pentagon to oversee the investigation, your actions this morning potentially saved not just lives, but prevented an attack that could have had devastating effects on military recruitment, public trust, and national security.
Irony.
The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Daniel's apparent act of insubordination had actually been the highest form of military service, protecting innocent lives and defending national interests against a genuine threat. Captain Rodriguez, who had been furious with Daniel that morning, now sat at the investigation table with a very different expression on his face. Sergeant Hayes, I owe you an apology, he said formally. I was so focused on the appearance of discipline that I almost missed a real security threat. Your willingness to trust your instincts over protocol may have prevented a catastrophe. Investigation Board spent 2 more hours reviewing security footage, witness statements, and expert analysis of Webb's explosive device. The bomb had been sophisticated enough to cause massive casualties and was specifically designed to create maximum chaos and terror. The device was packed with shrapnel designed to cause the greatest possible harm to people in military uniforms, explained a bomb disposal expert. If it had detonated in the formation area, the psychological impact on surviving military personnel would have been devastating. As the day wore on, Daniel began to understand the full scope of what had been prevented. This wasn't just about saving lives in that moment. It was about preventing an attack that could have changed public perception of military ceremonies, government events, and national security for years to come. The little girl who had started it all was brought back with her parents for a formal interview. With child psychologists and FBI specialists trained in questioning young witnesses, despite her age, she provided crucial details about Webb's behavior and statements that helped investigators understand his motivation and methods. She told us that the bad man said he wanted to make the whole country sad about soldiers, the child psychologist reported. She also mentioned that he seemed to know specific details about the ceremony schedule and the senator's planned route. The information confirmed that Webb had inside knowledge of the event, possibly from accomplices who had not yet been identified. The FBI launched a broader investigation to determine if this was part of a larger plot against military or government targets. As evening approached, Daniel finally learned the decision of the investigation board. General Williams stood to deliver the verdict that would determine whether his military career was over or just beginning a new chapter. Sergeant Hayes, after reviewing all evidence and testimony regarding today's events, this board finds that your actions were not only justified, but exemplified the highest standards of military service, she announced. Your ability to recognize and respond to a genuine threat, even when it meant breaking with established protocol, demonstrates the kind of critical thinking and moral courage that the military needs in its leaders. Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him, but General Williams wasn't finished. Furthermore, this board recommends that Sergeant Hayes be considered for promotion to Staff Sergeant and be awarded the Army Commendation Medal for his actions in preventing a terrorist attack on American soil. The room erupted in applause from the military officials and investigators who had spent the day learning about Daniel's quick thinking and brave response to an unprecedented situation. But for Daniel, the real reward wasn't the recognition or the promotion. It was knowing that a little girl in a yellow dress would go home safely to her family, and that hundreds of other people would do the same because someone had listened. When a child tried to warn them about the bad man with the camera, 2 weeks after the incident, Daniel found himself in Washington, D.C., standing in the East Room of the White House alongside the little girl who had changed everything. Emma Rodriguez, he had finally learned her name, wore a new yellow dress. For the occasion, holding her mother's hand as they waited to meet the president. The story had spread across the country faster than anyone expected. Major news networks had picked up the footage of Daniel breaking formation, initially criticizing him for abandoning military discipline during an important ceremony. But when the full story emerged about the prevented terrorist attack, the narrative completely changed. From insubordination to hero, how one soldier's split-second decisions saved lives, read the headline in the Washington Post. CNN ran a special feature about the importance of trusting instincts in security situations. Military blogs and veteran organizations praised Daniel's ability to balance protocol with practical threat assessment. President Martinez entered the East Room with a warm smile, approaching Daniel and Emma's family directly. "Sergeant Hayes, I've been looking forward to meeting the man who showed us that sometimes the most important military decisions happen when you choose people over protocol." Daniel stood at attention. "Mr. President, I was just doing what seemed right at the time." "That's exactly what makes it remarkable," the president replied. "In a moment of crisis, you trusted the testimony of a child over the expectations of your superiors. That shows the kind of moral courage that has always defined our military at its best." The president knelt down to speak with Emma, who had become something of a celebrity in the weeks following the incident. Children's organizations had praised her bravery, and she had received hundreds of letters from kids across the country telling her she was their hero. "Miss Emma, I understand you were very brave in helping to keep everyone safe," President Martinez said gently. Emma nodded seriously. "The bad man was scary, but I knew the soldiers would help me if I could get to them. My daddy says soldiers always protect people." The ceremony was being broadcast live, and Daniel knew that millions of people were watching. The White House had decided to use this moment to highlight the importance of community vigilance and the courage of ordinary citizens who speak up when they notice something wrong. Secretary of Defense Janet Morrison stepped forward to read the citation for Daniel's Army Commendation Medal. For exceptional heroism and devotion to duty in preventing a terrorist attack that could have resulted in massive casualties and national trauma, Sergeant Hayes demonstrated extraordinary judgment, moral courage, and commitment to protecting innocent life. As the medal was pinned to Daniel's dress uniform, he thought about how different this moment was from what he had imagined his military career would look like. He had always assumed that recognition would come from following orders perfectly, not from the one time he chose to break ranks. After the formal ceremony, Daniel was invited to speak with a group of military academy cadets who had been brought to witness the event. These were young men and women preparing to become the next generation of military leaders, and they had questions about how to balance obedience with independent thinking. "Sir, how did you know when it was appropriate to disobey orders?" asked Cadet Jennifer Walsh from West Point. Daniel considered the question carefully. "I think the key is understanding that our ultimate duty is to protect innocent people and serve the greater good. When following a specific order would prevent you from fulfilling that larger mission, you have to be willing to make difficult decisions." Another cadet raised his hand. "Were you afraid of the consequences when you broke formation?" "Absolutely," Daniel admitted. "I knew I could face disciplinary action, loss of rank, even discharge from the military. But I also knew that if I was wrong, the worst that would happen to me was damage to my career." If I was right and did nothing, people could die. The questions continued for another hour. With the cadets clearly fascinated by the ethical complexity of Daniel's decision, these future officers were learning that leadership sometimes meant taking personal risks to do what was right. Even when it went against established procedures, Emma and her family were also honored during the White House visit. The president announced the creation of a new community awareness program that would teach children and adults how to recognize and report suspicious behavior. Emma would serve as the program's first junior ambassador, helping to create educational materials for other kids. Sometimes the most important intelligence comes from the people who aren't trained to ignore what seems out of place. President Martinez explained. Emma saw something that adults might have dismissed, and she was brave enough to seek help when she felt afraid. The program would be implemented in schools, community centers, and public events across the country. It aimed to strike a balance between security awareness and avoiding paranoia, teaching people to trust their instincts while also understanding how to properly report concerns to authorities. During a private moment after the public ceremony, Daniel had a chance to talk with Emma and her parents about how the experience had affected their lives. The family had been overwhelmed by the attention, but they seemed to be handling it well. "Mr. Daniel," Emma said, tugging on his uniform. "Sleeve, my mommy says you saved lots of people because you listened to me. Does that mean I helped save people too?" Daniel knelt down to her level, just as he had done on that chaotic morning 2 weeks earlier. "Emma, you absolutely saved people. You were the first person to recognize that something was wrong, and you were brave enough to get help. Without you, none of the rest would have mattered." Emma's mother added. "We've been talking with Emma about how this experience shows that even children can make a difference when they speak up about things that scare them or seem wrong." As the day in Washington concluded, Daniel realized that the story wasn't really about him breaking formation or even about preventing a terrorist attack. It was about the power of listening to people who might otherwise be ignored, trusting instincts over appearances, and understanding that sometimes the most important service comes from caring about individual human beings rather than abstract rules and procedures. The medal on his chest was nice. The recognition was gratifying. The real reward was knowing that Emma Rodriguez could sleep safely at night, along with all the other people who had been on that parade ground too. Weeks ago, 1 year after the incident that changed his life, Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes stood before a new group of military recruits at the training facility, where he now served as an instructor. The classroom was filled with young men and women who had joined the military for all the same reasons he had: to serve their country, gain direction in their lives, and be part of something bigger than themselves. Today we're going to talk about situational awareness and the importance of trusting your instincts. Daniel began, looking out at the eager faces before him. "But first I want to tell you about a little girl in a yellow dress who taught me the most important lesson of my military career." The story had become part of military training curriculum at bases across the country. The incident at the parade ground was now used as a case study in leadership programs, showing how effective decision-making often requires balancing rules with judgment, and how the most important intelligence sometimes comes from unexpected sources. Daniel had been promoted twice in the past year and was now considered one of the military's leading experts on threat assessment and community engagement. He traveled to different bases, teaching soldiers how to recognize potential security risks, while also building positive relationships with civilian communities. "The key lesson," Daniel continued, "is that your primary mission is always to protect innocent people and serve the greater good. Sometimes that means following orders exactly as given. Sometimes it means using your judgment to adapt those orders to unexpected situations." One of the recruits raised her hand. "Staff Sergeant Hayes, what happened to the little girl who warned you about the threat?" Daniel smiled. "Emma Rodriguez is now 8 years old, and she's become quite the advocate for community safety. She speaks at schools and community events, teaching other children about the importance of speaking up when they see something that doesn't seem right." Emma had indeed become a remarkable young spokesperson for security awareness. Her program had been implemented in over 500 schools across the country, and she had personally visited dozens of communities to share her story. Despite her young age, she had shown a natural ability to communicate with both children and adults about safety. Without creating fear, the prevented attack had led to significant changes in military ceremony protocols. Security screening for press credentials had been enhanced. Background checks had been strengthened. New procedures had been implemented for monitoring crowd behavior during high-profile events. Marcus Webb, the would-be terrorist, had been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The investigation had revealed that he was part of a larger network of domestic terrorists who targeted military and government facilities. Information gathered from his case had helped prevent 3 additional planned attacks in other states. The most important thing Webb's case taught us, Daniel explained to his students, is that threats can come from anywhere, including people who seem to have legitimate access to secure areas. That's why we always need to be observant and trust our instincts even when everything appears normal on the surface. During a break in the class, Daniel received a call from Colonel Matthews, his former commanding officer. "Daniel, I have some news that I think you'll find interesting. The Pentagon has approved a new program based on your experience, and they want you to help design it." The program was called Community Guardian Initiative, and it would train military personnel to work closely with civilian communities to identify and prevent security threats. The idea was to create a network of awareness that went beyond traditional security measures. Recognizing that ordinary citizens often notice things that trained professionals might miss, the program will start with 10 pilot communities, Colonel Matthews explained. Each location will have military advisors who work with local schools, community centers, and neighborhood organizations to create a culture of mutual protection and awareness. Daniel was excited about the opportunity, but he had one condition. "Sir, I'd like Emma Rodriguez and her family to be involved in developing the training materials for the civilian component. Her perspective on how children can contribute to community safety could be invaluable." The colonel agreed immediately. Emma's story had become so well known that her involvement would lend credibility and appeal to the program. Her ability to explain complex security concepts in simple terms had already proven effective in her school presentations. 6 months later, Daniel found himself back at Riverside Elementary School, where Emma was now a 3rd grader. He was there to observe one of her presentations to younger students about community safety awareness. "Boys and girls," Emma said confidently to a room full of kindergartners, "today we're going to learn about being safety helpers in our community. Does anyone know what it means to be a safety helper?" A little boy raised his hand. "It means helping people when they're hurt?" "That's one way," Emma replied. "But it also means paying attention to things that don't seem right and telling a grown-up. When something makes you worried or scared," Daniel watched with amazement as this 8-year-old girl confidently taught younger children about concepts that many adults struggled to understand. She had taken the most frightening experience of her young life and transformed it into a mission to help others stay safe. "Remember," Emma continued, "if someone shows you scary pictures or says mean things about people who help keep us safe, like soldiers or police officers or firefighters, you should tell a teacher or your parents right away. Sometimes bad people try to trick children into helping them do bad things." After the presentation, Daniel had a chance to talk with Emma privately. She had grown taller and more confident, but she still had the same bright eyes and serious expression that he remembered from that chaotic morning at the parade ground. "Mr. Daniel, do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't run to you that day?" Emma asked. Daniel knelt down to her level, just as he had done so many times before. Emma, I try not to think about that too much. Instead, I focus on how proud I am of your courage and how many people you've helped by sharing your story. My mom says that sometimes bad things happen so that good people can learn how to prevent worse things from happening." Emma said thoughtfully, "Do you think that's true?" Daniel considered her question carefully. At 8 years old, Emma was grappling with concepts that philosophers and theologians had debated for centuries. "I think your mom is very wise," he said finally. "For sure is that your bravery that day has made a lot of communities safer for other children." The Community Guardian Initiative had exceeded all expectations in its first year of operation. The 10 pilot communities had reported a 40% increase in useful security tips from civilian sources, and 3 separate incidents had been prevented. Based on information provided by community members who had been trained to recognize suspicious behavior, more importantly, the program had improved relationships between military personnel and civilian communities. Instead of viewing security as something that only professionals could handle, communities were learning that everyone had a role to play in keeping their neighbors safe. Daniel's role in the program had evolved beyond his original expectations. He was now developing training protocols that would be used by military advisors across the country. And he had been invited to speak at international conferences about community-based security approaches. But his favorite part of the job remained working directly with communities like Emma's, where he could see the practical impact of the lessons learned from that morning at the parade ground as he prepared to leave the elementary school. Emma's teacher approached him with a folder full of drawings from her students. Hayes, the children wanted to create something special for you, she said. Daniel opened the folder to find dozens of colorful drawings showing soldiers and children working together to keep communities safe. One drawing showed a little girl in a yellow dress talking to a soldier in uniform with the words "Heroes help each other" written in crayon at the bottom. "These are incredible," Daniel said, genuinely moved by the children's artwork. "Please tell them how much this means to me." That evening, Daniel sat in his apartment looking through the drawings and reflecting on how much his life had changed since that morning when he chose to abandon formation for mere seconds. The decision that could have ended his military career had instead led to the most meaningful work he had ever done. His phone buzzed with a text message from Emma's mother, Daniel. "Emma wanted me to send you this picture from her presentation today. She says to tell you that she's proud to be your partner in keeping kids safe." The attached photo showed Emma standing confidently in front of her classroom, pointing to a poster that read, "Community Safety Heroes come in all sizes." Her bright smile and confident posture showed how far she had come from the terrified little girl who had run toward a formation of soldiers seeking protection. Daniel smiled as he looked at the photo, then reached into his desk drawer to pull out a small frame containing his Army commendation medal. Next to it was a hand-drawn card that Emma had given him after the White House ceremony, with a simple message written in her careful third-grade handwriting. "Thank you for listening to me when I was scared." As he prepared for bed, Daniel reflected on the lesson that Emma had taught him and that he now taught to military personnel across the country. Sometimes the most important service you can provide is simply paying attention to the people around you and taking their concerns seriously, especially when those people are small, young, or seem powerless. The little girl in the yellow dress had saved hundreds of lives by having the courage to speak up about something that frightened her. Daniel had helped prevent a national tragedy by having the wisdom to listen. Together, they had proven that heroism often comes not from following rules perfectly, but from caring enough about other people to do what's right, even when it means taking personal risks. The morning he abandoned formation for mere seconds had indeed prevented what could have been a national scandal. But more than that, it had created a legacy of community protection that would keep children safe for generations to come. And it had all started because one soldier chose to trust the words of one brave little girl who refused to stay silent when she encountered something that seemed wrong. In the end, Daniel realized that was what true military service was all about, not the perfect execution of orders, but the perfect commitment to protecting those who needed protection. No matter how small their voices or how unexpected their warnings might be,